Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frater Eleftheria, and in this video I'm going to be talking about spiritual trials that we can go through and what is the true kind of significance of those, because many spiritual trials that we go through on our journey can be quite painful, and it kind of leads us to question, is this a spiritual attack? Is it some kind of curse? Or are these trials some kind of a test which will prove to be a blessing when I get through the trial and I learn something? So I want to explore whether these trials that we can face on the spiritual path are indeed a blessing or a curse. Now, I've spoken about spiritual trials or spiritual tests before on this channel, and I might even link those videos in the description below. But I was thinking about this topic again recently, as the end of 2024 was starting to come around, and I was going on one of my walks and I was thinking about the various trials that I've been through, especially over the last few years, and the way that I have viewed those trials in the past. The spiritual teachings that I was being guided by at the time in my life when these trials really started to pick up was kind of sadistic, and it kind of took this view of the universe where the masters or God or whoever is sitting up there sending us these trials, sending us these tests, essentially causing us suffering on purpose, to see how far we can be pushed, uh, you know, before we give in to temptation or give in to our temper or emotionally break down in some way because we're too attached to the ego or something. This really toxic kind of teaching that I'd been exposed to about spiritual tests and trials. And it really wasn't helpful for my spiritual growth. It gave me this really unhealthy view of what the divine was and what the divine plan was, and it actually made me resent the divine for causing needless suffering. And how could something that is good willfully cause suffering when there are so many other teaching tools at its disposal if it truly is all powerful? And why is it that testing people who are on the path toward good looks much the same as divine punishment for those who are wicked? And how is that equivalency fair? So obviously the way that I was looking at it was all wrong. The teaching that I had received to try and explain why we have these trials in our lives on the spiritual path was wrong in some way. And I'll never forget when I went to one of my teachers at this time complaining about the hard time that I'd had with people as a result of some of these trials. And that teacher told me that it was a wonderful thing that I was suffering so much. No compassion, no extending any kind of warmth or emotional support, just a really callous response. And, if I was upset that I was being treated unfairly, it's just because I still had the ego. And so it was my problem that I was reacting that way. And so there can be some really toxic teachings and toxic people who completely misinterpret what it means to be tested on the spiritual path. But we undoubtedly are. When we strive towards something greater and higher, suddenly the tests come down upon us. Like we're weathering a sudden onset of a storm. There's no doubt that it happens. So why does this phenomenon happen? Why is it that we're on the spiritual path and we're faced with this torrent of difficulties that are often quite painful? Is it actually a spiritual attack? Well, not exactly. I mean, sometimes there can be spiritual attacks. There is a kind of opening for the darkness to try and enter our lives a lot more profoundly than if we had just ignored the spiritual. And, it seems contradictory, and it took me a while to understand what the true significance of spiritual trials was, but I think I've finally got it, and that's what I'm going to share with you tonight. So I do think that in the final analysis, the fact that we have teachings out there that treat these difficult situations in our lives as a spiritual test that will ultimately teach us a lesson that will help us grow as a result is a positive thing, but not for the kind of reasons that you might expect. There's no gaslighting or normalizing of hazing required to see these tests as a positive thing. But before I explain that further, let me just explain why I think these tests or trials come upon somebody who's living a spiritual life. So, if you have decided that you're going to dedicate your life to a higher calling, that you want to raise your vibration or your frequency, as is often the terminology used in contemporary spirituality, then once you make that decision to live with integrity, to live from higher principles, to live for something that is above anything that is of the world will resist your attempt to escape its clutches, whether that's through people or the structures of society or just the sheer ignorance or the forces of nature, whatever it is. There are all these forces that belong to the dark realm, to the physical world, that are going to try and drag you back down. There are people who don't want you to better yourself, perhaps a group of people who used to be your friends, who relate to the old version of you and don't want to see you change because it makes them look bad. Perhaps there are people who are jealous of you. Perhaps there are people who don't appreciate that you're a truth teller because they live an inauthentic life. And all of these things makes them want to tear you down. And some people are just, they are just triggered by good people. They think that, they must have an easy life to be such personable people, not thinking that, in fact, that person may have worked on themselves to reach that point. And of course, standing up against injustice is going to aggravate a lot of people, because there are a lot of people who are wicked, who take advantage of other people, who break the rules. That is the moral rules, not the arbitrary rules of the world that I'm referring to. And if people call them out on it or challenge them, they get very, very upset, because they depend on wickedness to get by in life. And when somebody disturbs that or calls that into question, they don't appreciate it very much. So there's all these little reasons why people that are very much embroiled in the ways of the world will go after or attack or lash out at somebody who is on the spiritual path. And systems that are built upon those assumptions of a wicked humanity will also go against somebody who is trying to be on that path, like somebody swimming upstream. And so it's no surprise then, when you take that into consideration, that when somebody makes the decision to follow the light, that they will be tested, because the world will start attacking them at that point. The forces of darkness will start to attack them at that point. And that's the real reason why the trials come on. That is the explanation. Rather than your worthiness needs to be tested to see whether you're really serious about the path, or there's some karma that you need to pay by being given painful situations, all of that is nonsense. This is the explanation. This is the genuine explanation for those spiritual trials. And it requires no gaslighting. It requires no guilt for things that are not your fault. So it is not God or the masters or our spiritual guides that are sending us these tests. It's actually, or sending us these situations, I should say, it's actually the world that is responsible for these difficulties. And that is an important thing to recognize. So now that we've established why these trials happen, I want to explain how transforming that into a spiritual test is actually adding something positive to an otherwise negative situation. So these bad things happen to you, whether it's difficulties with people at work, or difficulties with a client, or difficulties with friends or family members, or whatever it is, as a result of you raising your vibration and the overwhelming majority of the rest of the human race being on a spiritually downward trajectory. So you find yourself in a situation where somebody is attacking you. How then are you going to react to that situation? You can give in to your initial reactions of anger or resentment or fear or sadness and let those drag your consciousness down. You can become so attached to those negative states that they drag you down and you become lost in them. Or alternatively, you can go into those situations consciously. Once you've become conscious in those situations, rather than your immediate reaction, you can kind of sit with them and then try and understand them, and having understood them, transform them. Find out if there's anything in yourself that is causing those situations, and then transform that. Or find out if there is some other way that you can respond in those situations that's going to elevate everybody's state of being instead of lowering it, and then putting that into practice. And when you can do that, this difficult situation that's just a bad situation becomes a spiritual test. And a situation that would otherwise only be negative suddenly can be turned into a positive and used to create a positive outcome rather than just a chain of negative consequences as a result of that. And you can break the chain of negative consequences in order to produce light instead, transforming darkness into light. And perhaps there's a series of negative interactions between people leading up to that point where someone's taking out their frustration on you. But because you can transform that situation into light, the buck stops with you in terms of the spread of the darkness. And really, the test of it is seeing how far we can challenge ourselves in terms of how much light we can transmute from that darkness, how much strength and will we have, and how much ability we have to transform even the most dramatically bad situations. And it might be unfair that we're in those situations in the first place, but without that tool of being able to treat things as a test, we just suffer. At least if we view things as a test, there is an opportunity for growth. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think that it's only situations such as I described earlier, different relationships between people that might be kind of vexed in particular ways, that is the only source of a test. There can be testing situations which are completely accidental, which have nothing to do with any person reacting to any other person. There's good and bad in the world, there's a mixture. Sometimes we just find ourselves quite by accident in unfortunate situations. And those aren't our fault either. It's not because of something that we did in a past life or whatever. And even if it is, it's not helpful to think of that in that way. So, because we don't remember what we did in those past lives. So far as we're concerned, we're feeling guilty for something we never did. But whatever the reason for that is irrelevant. Even accidents, unhappy accidents that lead to certain situations can be treated as a spiritual test. And in this way, we can understand the phenomenon of spiritual tests and trials from a positive standpoint and without kind of silly ideas and superstitions and weird cultish kind of beliefs, and we can get some benefit out of understanding the phenomenon of spiritual tests or trials without shame or blame or guilt, just turning negatives into a positive. And that's what I want to provide tonight by sharing this insight with you. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like down below, subscribe to my channel to support my work, and if you want to support me further, hit join or thanks down below. But thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.